Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. To start off today's show, I'm going to review the film Smile 2, and in the second half, I'll be discussing why horror is such a good genre. So starting off with Smile 2, just a few things I want to get out of the way. I was pretty excited for this movie. The first was a pretty pleasant surprise at the time it was released. It wasn't a great movie, in my opinion. I just rewatched it a couple weeks ago, and it didn't blow me away once again, but the short the movie is based on is really good, and as a whole, Smile is far better than I expected, because the trailers just kind of made it look like it would be similar to Blumhouse's Truth or Dare, which if you haven't seen it, is a terrible, terrible horror movie. That's kind of where like everyone's smiling, and it looks like they have like Snapchat filters on their faces, and it just looks really stupid. It's not scary at all. It's terrible, terrible movie. But watch it if you want to laugh. It's good for that. But in any case, Smile is based on a short film titled Laura Hasn't Slept. It's a pretty good one, so I recommend maybe checking that out if you're interested in seeing where this kind of franchise came from. And it was initially meant to be a streaming movie, but it was put in theaters after positive test screenings, which really goes to show just how important theatrical releases are. I mean, this movie, would have been buried on streaming. Like, maybe people could have checked it out. Like, it would have been on Paramount Plus, which isn't, like, the most well-known streaming service. And probably wouldn't have gotten nearly as much positive reception as it got in theaters. But people really liked it. The first one was a huge hit, so of course they wanted to make a second film. But a large reason why these movies actually became so popular, besides seeing the trailer every single time you went to the movie, which I remember the first one so much, it's like literally anything I went to go see, it was a Smile trailer, and it wasn't even a good trailer, so like I was just like, why are we seeing this? It didn't look very good, but the marketing outside of the trailers has actually been really nice. I remember the first one and also the second one, they have like a bunch of, paid people who are just smiling at like sporting events and stuff in like really creepy ways, wearing Smile t-shirts. So that was like very viral. I think people even on the news, like people in the background of like the news were wearing it and doing smiles. It was just really interesting. And also, even just for Smile 2, they just did something where they released the first 7 minutes online, and you can only see the whole thing if you smile the entire time. Like, it uses your camera to watch you and see if you're smiling, and if you are, it'll show you the first 7 minutes, which, honestly, as I'll get to, is the best part of the movie, so definitely give that a try if you're curious about Smile 2. But in any case, the first movie was about a therapist who kind of gets this smile curse and tries to find a way to stop it before it kills her. She's sort of seeing all these visions around her and like hallucinating a lot. It was pretty small scale and self-contained, which I actually enjoyed. It really just puts you in this very closed-off environment where you're really just focusing on a few characters and you don't really know what's real anymore. It's pretty interesting and fairly enjoyable, though not a great movie in my opinion. But what got me so interested in the sequel is that it's much larger in scale and follows a big singer who gets the smile curse and is trying to deal with it while preparing for her big comeback tour. And that itself to me is a total like shift in what kind of movie this is. Like, the first one is a very small scale psychological thriller horror kind of thing, and this one, just putting it in like the perspective of a singer, is much bigger and just feels more grand in a lot of ways. I don't think the movie itself feels huge watching it, but like just perspective change is a really smart one, and I think it adds a lot to what makes this movie like feel more fresh. But before I get to more on the rest of Smile 2, I want to discuss the opening scene, which I just mentioned before, which you can see online. And it works as an epilogue to Smile 1 and a prologue to Smile 2. It's a great scene. It's one long take. It's intense. It sets the mood and is very well made. I just really love that scene a lot. And I would say, like, if you watch Smile 1, it's very rewarding. And if you didn't watch Smile 1, you're probably watching it very out of context, but it still works. It's a very good scene. But I want to take this time to mention the writer and director of these films, Parker Finn, and how much he's evolved between these movies. In the first one, like, it was his directorial debut, his feature directorial debut, and he made the short film, but This time around, he just feels much more confident, and he has these great bold choices throughout the movie and very thought out sequences. Namely, like the opening, there's a scene in a car where the camera moves around a lot. You have this one other scene that's probably one of my favorites with like dancers and a bunch of extras in a room. It's so good, and I just really love the way Parker Finn does this movie. He kind of strikes you as one of the most like interesting voices in horror right now. Even though I think maybe his scripts can use some work, I think that just as a director and a visionary, he does something that's really different from everyone else out there, while still kind of appealing to the masses. And I think he just does a really good job with that. And besides Parker Finn, I feel like you really can't talk about Smile 2 without addressing the amazing Naomi Scott. I've only seen her in a few things before, namely things she wasn't, she was good in, but the movies themselves weren't great. Like the live action Aladdin. I mean, it's an enjoyable movie, but nothing really that memorable, let's be honest. I don't think anyone's really thinking about that movie after they saw it. But Naomi Scott in this movie is excellent. Excellent, absolutely excellent. In a better world, Naomi Scott would probably get an Academy Award nomination for her role in this, because it is multi-layered in so many ways. She has to do a lot of singing, dancing, and also, above all that, having these great dramatic chops. And she brings it all. She actually has a great voice for singing, so she checks that box. Her dancing is very impressive. The choreography there is really good, so she got that off. And then she also is just a great actress. I mean, really, like, some scenes in here, they're very impressive. I mean, how much she sells what she's going through, you totally believe it watching her. And it makes it scarier. A lot of what makes horror great is watching the character reactions, and seeing them scared makes you scared. She sells that completely. Naomi Scott sells that completely. And I also have to credit the movie for totally convincing me that Sky Riley could be a real celebrity. I mean, I know that, Naomi Scott plays Sky Riley and that's not a real person, but really, if, like, I was not aware of anything going on in the real world, I wasn't, like, aware of who celebrities were, like, you could convince me 100% that Sky Riley is a real celebrity and they just hired her for this movie, because she just feels like someone who has a great presence. Again, thanks to Naomi Scott. And the songs are actually solid, too. Like, they're not even just, like, cheap, bad songs written for the movie. Like, they feel like actually, like, good songs that you would hear on the radio. Real radio's dead, so you hear it on streaming. But she's great. She's really good in this. And, obviously she's playing someone who's scared of a lot, but it also helps that this is a scary movie. This movie is packed with jump scares, but they are effective ones. And I'm not someone who likes jump scares, but these actually kind of work, because this movie's really like, it does jump scares at its best when it uses editing to its advantage, rather than just doing the typical, quiet build-ups, walking around very slowly, and no sound going on, and then boom, jump. That's annoying. But this movie, what it does really well is, like, characters will just be talking. They'll just be looking at something, they'll just be, like, having a normal conversation, and out of nowhere, bam, it's like, it just cuts to something really scary, and it shocks you. It's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like being at a haunted house, but, it just works with that. Like, it actually gets you, because it doesn't really creep up on you as much as it just, like, jolts you. And I like that, actually. I think that's a much better way to do a jump scare, because you just don't see it coming at all. Like, and even rewatching it, like, I don't remember exactly when this happens a lot of the time, so if you just rewatch it, like, you're not even going to see it coming again, which is, I think, a really nice way to do jump scares. I think it does it very well here. One thing I really like about these Smile movies is how they mess with the characters and audience's sense of reality, kind of enough to the point where after some time, you as a person can't really trust anything you see along with the characters. I think that's just such a really interesting way of doing things, because it's like having an unreliable narrator, but the character doesn't trust themselves even, so you really don't know what to believe. The movie just does a very good job convincing you that nothing is actually really true, so it just kind of makes you really, like, unsure what to expect at certain points. Like, oh, anything could happen right now. I don't even really know anymore. I also enjoyed the movie's take on mental health, especially for celebrities who are forced to sort of put on a smile and feel forced to go against their better judgment so they don't let others down. I feel like that's just something you can kind of relate to a lot with celebrities out there. Like, they really put on this act. They're going on tours and they're doing all these, big things, and internally they're maybe having struggles of their own, but they're just going along with the ride because either they have to, like they signed a contract, or they're just like really trying not to let their fans down. This movie kind of addresses some of that, and I think does it in a meaningful way. I think it actually has good commentary. The first one also had good commentary about mental health and sort of like, again, a therapist who is going through something and no one's really like giving her attention. No one's really like supporting her or being there for her. She's just kind of on her own. And this movie just has a nice conversation with each other. These Smile movies really have a good conversation with each other about mental health and the different ways in which it can really get impacted by disease and just things around you and other people. It just really, I like that a lot. I think these movies actually have more to say than a lot of other horror movies out there, and I like that. But kind of getting into some of my issues now with the movie, and there are a bunch actually. One is that the pacing is just too long, like the first film. You easily could have shaved, in my opinion, like 20 minutes off of this movie, which is a lot. I think it's Parker Finn's biggest weakness as a director right now and a writer. I just don't think he completely has gotten the hang of when to just let something go and when to speed things up more. Pacing is a very important part of a movie to me. If I'm feeling like it's just slogging along, then that really impacts my experience. And the movie just kind of feels like it's spinning its wheels during the second act. The middle portion of the movie, it just feels like risks are, kind of repeating themselves too much, and it doesn't do enough to change things up. I think the first Smile also had significant pacing issues. This movie, though, was even longer than the first Smile, and I think because it's not, doing something totally original, in that, you've already seen a Smile Demon in the first one, you kind of know where it's going. I think it makes it even a little slower going in. Also because the first one has more interesting subplots. It actually has this whole mystery going on of, where did this curse come from? How can you stop it? This movie, it doesn't want to repeat itself, which I appreciate. It doesn't just go on that same quest again, but it tries to do something different. But at the same time, it also just feels like it's not really going anywhere that new for a while. And I think the third act also kind of falls apart upon further inspection. I actually really liked the third act until it ended. And I think it has good ideas. A lot of what it sets up is actually very compelling, and I think is a great different angle than what the first movie had. But it just doesn't explore them that much. It gets a little too caught up with being surprising and twisty. And it doesn't say anything very new. It doesn't really, evolve this world much more than you kind of already knew. And I think it also just has a very predictable ending that doesn't sit well with me either. I think it's an ending that gets you kind of hyped up when you first see it. Oh my god, they're really doing this? But then it just kind of when you think about it, you realize the implications of that ending, and you're I don't really know now where you can go from here. So we'll see. In time, maybe this ending will age better, but I just don't think it's going to go very well. I don't really love the way they took it at the very end. And again, it just really made the whole third act feel irrelevant at a point. To me, it just kind of got rid of all that intensity. And I feel on rewatch, it's also going to hurt its rewatch value, because I'll be well, I could just, leave for a half hour and come back and I won't miss anything. So it's a little annoying with that. So that kind of bothered me a bit. And kind of going off what I said, a minute ago, I'm just not really sure where the franchise can go from here. They took things to such great lengths from the first movie in this one, where they really, upped the stakes, they upped, the look of it, the feel of it, everything. And I just can't think of the next logical step for this franchise without it getting kind of stale. There are a couple options you can do. I mean, you can try to change location, like do something, a completely different country maybe. You can kind of follow a different type of person again. Like maybe you could do a prequel. But I just feel like, it's a formula. Like these movies have a formula because the demon has to do, its thing in a certain amount of time. And it's just kind of like, where are you going to go after this? Like, I just don't know how to do it without, once again, repeating itself over and over again. But look, at the end of the day, this is a fine horror movie. It gets the job done. Parker Finn's direction and Naomi Scott's performance are the main reasons to see this movie. They do a really great job, but otherwise, I think it's a movie where if you take off the mask of this more ambitious movie, you realize that underneath it's a pretty safe sequel that doesn't think too far outside of the box. And what I'm really getting at here is that the movie just kind of looks like something really new and fresh, and it has this sort of disguise that it's like very different from the first movie. But I think, especially after just rewatching the first one maybe a couple weeks ago, like if you haven't rewatched the first one, maybe the twists in the second one will be more surprising. But I just feel like it has a very specific amount of party tricks it can do, and it repeats a lot of them to the point where the twists aren't really that surprising. They're just kind of like, oh, okay, you're doing it here. But I think just like taking out the vibe, taking out like the aesthetic of it, it's just very similar to the first movie. And I hope that if they do make a third Smile, I hope Parker Finn continues to kind of take a look into the script and really find new avenues to go without getting too repetitive. I hope, he's willing to take some more risks and just make something feel very different structurally than what he did here, which is just a movie that, he's much more confident directing and you feel a change there, but, you just look at the whole movie and it feels very familiar in that sense. So, I don't know, I'd give this one a C+. It's perfectly fine. It's not a movie that I would say is, unenjoyable. I just wasn't really that impressed by it. I was a bit disappointed, honestly. I just can't really call either of these Smile movies that game-changing. And even though they have impressive elements, like I think, especially in the second one, technically it one-ups the first one in every single way. I think just like on a script level and a story level, it's actually kind of weaker than the first film, and it's just not as fresh as I was hoping it would be. But with that out of the way, let's talk about horror as a genre, and more specifically, why horror, in my opinion, is a great genre. First thing I want to talk about is, at its core, horror is a gateway into different types of stories. And kind of what I mean by that is, horror, I always used to think growing up, like, horror was just about being scary. It was just about being frightening. And while horror is oftentimes about, being scary and getting under your skin and really, like, making you nervous, horror is just something that can lead to so many great stories and unexpected ways of telling stories that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. Like, as a kid, I didn't really have interest in horror movies. I thought, the trailers looked too scary. I just wasn't really interested in watching something to just feel scared with. And I didn't really understand why anyone would want to watch a horror movie. I was like, I'm not a fan of haunted houses. I just, to me, it's like, what benefit do I have in watching a horror movie? And the reality is that horror can actually tell some of the greatest stories film can bring. And the reason for that is that it dives into themes like grief and moving on, death, letting go, love, family, mental health. Just so many different varieties of stories that you can get from horror. And it's not just about being scary, it's about telling a story and telling one that actually has a real stakes and great characters and memorable villains. It's not just, it's not just a slasher movie. And we have slasher movies. Sometimes horror can just be for being scared, but oftentimes horror can be just a great genre because of what it brings to the conversation, what it brings to the film world. And I think another point is that Stephen King, the author of so many great horror stories like It and Salem's Lot and Carrie says that when something is scary is when you're scared for the characters. And I thought about that when I read it, and he's so right, because something just jumping out isn't scary. Like, I've discussed this many times. Something that jumps out is not scary, it's startling. It maybe, makes you jolt for a second, but, 5 seconds later you're fine. Like, you're not thinking about it anymore. But to actually be scared of something, to really fear for something or someone, you have to be scared for the characters. If you see this character scared, then you yourself are scared. I think it's just something that relates to so many movies, because even if the movie itself isn't that scary, like even if the monster isn't that creepy on paper, like seeing people in the story who you care about be scared and in danger, that really puts you, in this place where you're on the edge of your seat. You're like, I really hope they make it out okay, and I'm scared for them, even more than I'm scared maybe of this creature that's coming for them. And that just applies to so many different horror movies. And sometimes there isn't even a real monster at play. It's just like, horror can just be, maybe it is a slasher, and like someone's coming to knock down on the door, and they're, the character's in danger that you care about. This family that you care about is gonna die, and you're just like, please don't kill them. It's like, why are you making so many dumb decisions? I care about you. And just, there's so many different avenues for that. So that's something I really love about horror. But another thing is that horror can mix with so many genres, and that's what's just so impressive to me. Like, there are some genres out there that you can't really mix, but horror just goes with so many different types of movies. You can have a drama with horror, which can be like Hereditary or The Witch, that really just takes a more dramatic stance on the genre and shows, more of a character relationship dynamic and more about the themes of what's going on rather than just like a physical threat. You could have horror comedies like Get Out or Bodies, Bodies, Bodies or Happy Death Day, and even some more parodies like A Haunted House and Scary Movie. Scream can even fit in there a little bit. I think you have some other things in like horror with action, like the Purge movies, not the first one, but everything after that. Some of the Evil Dead movies can be very heavy on action. The movie Overlord with a bunch of like zombies. Aliens, which also has a ton of action. You can have horror thrillers like A Quiet Place and Strange Darling that really just have you on the edge of your seat and having a crazy ride. You can have horror coming of age stories like It, The Black Phone, Carrie, all movies that tell these stories about kids growing up and also facing horrors and scary things in life. You can have some horror sci-fi movies like Alien and The Thing, and you can have different types of horror in addition to genres like slashers and haunted house horror and body horror, demon exorcism movies, monsters, and fantastical. There's just so many different possibilities for what horror can be. It's not limited to one type of movie. I always used to think growing up, like, horror was just this one thing. Like, it was always just, a monster movie and, like, the demons coming and, the jump scares. And I think if you give horror a real chance, you'll see that it's not always what the trailers make it out to be. It's so much more than that, because you get great characters and just, again, memorable villains and great stories, most of all. I've been just so impressed with a lot of horror that I've seen lately, and a lot of people even are kind of saying right now that horror is like one of the only types of genres that will never really die. Like, comic book movies, I don't think they'll die either, but like, you can always agree there's maybe like fatigue of a genre. But horror has so many different avenues to go in as different genres. You can probably put horror in any type of movie, and it'll always get people to watch it because there's so many endless possibilities of what you can do. And I think horror is just one of those amazing genres that has so much potential and so much creativity involved. And it has these great stories. I love all the stories I've heard about, like, horror movies are often like some of the most fun movies to make, and on set everyone's just having like a great time. They're all smiling and laughing, and then when you watch the movie, it's just like the most traumatic thing ever. I just think that's so fascinating, but that's a different thing entirely. But yeah, I mean, I guess all I'm trying to say here is give horror a watch. I mean, if you maybe aren't too keen on horror, and you're, it's okay if you don't like being scared, like you don't want to watch a scary movie. I totally get it. It's not for everyone. The first horror movie I watched was The Conjuring, and I was terrified. I was going to be like, traumatized by that movie. I was like, I don't want to watch this. It's going to be too scary. But really what I found in it is just that it had really good characters, and you really cared about what was going on, so that even when you were scared, you were still really enjoying the movie and just having a great time watching it. So give horror some credit. Give it a watch. There's so many great movies to choose from. I think horror is one of the best genres out there, and it's an avenue to tell so many amazing stories. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.